as Mike said, I'm Alex. I'm from the UK, as some of you can probably tell from my accent. And I'm a hardware hacker, and it's something I've done my entire life. Last year, I realized I made a mistake when I went to the University of Cambridge. I realized that I was doing what people had told me to do, and up until that point, I'd been hacking hardware. And suddenly I was thrust into the situation where I was doing far more academia than I wanted to. So what I want to say is why it is possible for people like me to go out and do what they want to do. When I went to Cambridge, I was wanting people around me who were more intelligent, more passionate, and able to do stuff what they wanted. However, what I realized when I got there is that the people there weren't the artists, the makers, and the hackers, the people like me. They weren't the dreamers that I was expecting. So I dropped out, and I realized those people were in the real world. So they were doing what they wanted to without people telling them to, like the people here, for instance. So that's something I've realized, and the changes that the internet has allowed for are really non-trivial in that they've allowed for me to develop without the university degree to the extent that I'm comfortable dropping out. So I've been hardware hacking from a young age. And for me, hardware hacking is taking hardware or breaking hardware and making it how I want it to be, not how others thought I'd use it. So one example is, as I've grown up, I've been taking apart electronics hardware. So from a young age, taking apart computer PCBs and trying to figure out how they work or why they work, and then going on and making small charismatic robots using those components. So then, as I've grown up and progressed further, I've used those skills to develop greater hardware, which is more professional and indistinguishable from the professional hardware available. So then, from the age of 10 or so, I've been designing and building 3D printers, first with the MakerBot Cupcake, which was out in 2012 or so. And then I progressed onto the electrical design, as I said. And then from the age of 13, 14, I was in local newspapers being labeled as the whiz kid or child prodigy. And this struck me because all I was doing is the hardware hacking that I loved, rather than something that had been asked of me. So I realized that it seemed non-normal to go after what you really wanted and to not follow the dreams as opposed to go down the conventional routes, which is why I'm here today to encourage those of you in that route to really follow what you want to do as opposed to what's expected. So the internet has enabled three main things for me. So it's a realization that knowledge is everywhere, and anyone can access any of it at any point. So it may sound cliched, but over the last 5, 10, 15 years, everyone now has a phone that they take completely for granted. But with that phone, you're able to access anything you want. So 15, 20 years ago, there was knowledge taught in university degrees, which you could only access through university degrees, or by attending local libraries and searching for a book for a niche paragraph in some obscure shelf. Now you can just search for it, and you can find it within seconds. So it's now getting to the point where knowledge is no longer the value, where the understanding of knowledge no longer creates the value. You have to appreciate that everyone has access to that knowledge, and you can build upon that to create value through innovation and by using that knowledge to build ideas. Computers have access to the knowledge, and they're far more capable people at calculus, etc. So you need to be able to do what computers can't, which is to create the communities and to create the ideas. So then another aspect growing up is the democratization of technology. So growing up a lot, I realized that 3D printers were becoming available and allowed me to transform the ideas that I had in my head to real hardware. And 20, 30 years ago, this was something that was only available to commercial companies. And now it's coming to the point where 12-year-olds and 15-year-olds can do that themselves, all the way up until experienced engineers in companies. It's getting to the point where the two technologies are indistinguishable. And finally are the community aspects, the bit that ties this together. So like Innovate Pasadena, which brings together people interested in innovation, ideas, and technology, the spreading of internet communities brings similar people together. And growing up, this is something that has facilitated how I've been able to learn. So from the age of 12 or so, I've been using these communities and bouncing ideas off people who previously I just wouldn't have access to. So I was able to talk to people in Australia or New Zealand, literally 24-hour flight away, and that normally I would not be able to access. But I was able to tap into their engineering knowledge because they had far more experience than me and use their ideas. So, as I said, the spread of knowledge and internet has allowed knowledge to become a commodity. So everyone has access to the same stuff. If you have access to a mobile phone or a laptop or a computer, you can access the same as anyone else. As a result of this, anyone is able to learn anything at any point in any format. So as I've been growing up and learning various different softwares, I can access thousands of hours of YouTube videos, for instance, or hundreds of articles. And these are all formats that I've found interesting. However, some people that I know use audiobooks. And it's just a fact that in the current age, I'm able to learn in a different... in the current age, I'm able to learn in one format, other people are able to learn in other formats. With the conventional university degree, I realized that it's given to you in a 1-hour class at a regimented time, and there was no flexibility, or inherently less flexibility. And it was the flexibility and the ability to learn what I wanted, when I wanted, that has really empowered me to learn to the extent that I have. So I was also saying that value is now created by the innovations upon that knowledge. So I've been able to learn learn Eagle, which is a PCB design software, over the years. And that is no longer the important part of it. The important part is being able to take that and take the microcontroller circuits and the software and integrate it together to create something more final. So I'm creating value through the combination of this and the innovation upon each individual subsection. So now, as I've said with hardware hacking, I've done it since like the age of 6 or the age of 5, or it's long enough that I can't remember how long I've been doing it. So it's something that I just take completely for granted, and that as I use it more and more, I just gain the skills to be able to create new stuff. And this is particularly powerful for me because I feel like with the university course, you're taught how to approach different problems and how to distinguish one problem from the next, rather than being able to tell what a new problem is. So there are some projects that I've done, like the underwater robotics platform over the last year, that as new problems came along, I was able to look, and I was able to reach out to these communities and reach out to the internet and find and just Google an area surrounding the problem, so seals or watertight issues. And through a couple of hours, I'm able to locate that and ways of negating those issues. So then the democratization of technology is primarily split into, I'm obstructing the image, is primarily split into two aspects. Although closely entwined, software and hardware are very distinct. Software enables the creation of the hardware, and it also governs the control of it once you've created the hardware. So one example is using software packages such as Onshape, which is a CAD package, to design the hardware, and then you program that hardware through a microcontroller such as Arduino. This entwining is particularly powerful, and the democratization of technology over the last 10 years is enabling individuals like me to do this. And as I was saying, 10 years, 20 years ago, this was only available to a very select amount of people in the companies with that technology available. So on the software side of things, from a young age, so 8, 9, I've been using Blender. So when I was 8, 9, I saw that I had ideas in my head, and I saw physical objects, and clearly other people had the same thoughts, and they wanted to produce hardware. So I looked, and I realized that one of the fundamental steps is going from the idea in my head to an idea on the computer in order to take the first step in manufacturing it. So I had a look around, and it was suggested to me by my parents that I have a look at Blender, which is a modeling platform primarily aimed at animations and rendering. So I used that for a few months, self-teaching off books and tutorials. There were multiple days where I just spend the day on YouTube just watching and learning. So I progressed on to the ability to model basic things such as fruit. And then as time progressed and the months went on, I wanted to learn more mechanical designs. So I switched to using various free and very available softwares at the time and started to be able to produce more mechanical structures. And as the years went on, I grew competency with that. And I realized that I was now able to develop hardware to a much greater extent. So back when I was 14, 15, I entered a design competition which was aimed at college students. And I entered it because the contest scenario seemed particularly interesting. I didn't expect to get anywhere. But it was now at the stage where I was able to design stuff so that on this international competition, I was a finalist. And that was from the age of 14, 15. It was simply because I used these tools that were available to me and poured in hundreds of hours in learning them. So as time progressed, I've learned at my own pace, and whenever I've wanted to learn a new function, I was able to look at that specific function rather than just being told, here is the entire array of material, you need to know it all. So it's just a case of learning as I go and picking it up, and the internet has allowed that. So then, secondly, as I was saying, the hardware aspect. And this is the part which is particularly interesting to me, clearly, because that's what I love. The hardware is what I've been doing from the age of 6. So this is something particularly powerful, and I realized back in 2012, 2010, when MakeBook were coming out. So there was a whole slew of companies which were promising low cost, low mass manufacturing for everyone. I'm sure most people here have heard of the whole slew of companies. And one particular company that was coming out at the time was MakeBook. And they were promising desktop manufacturing for everyone. So they came out with the MakeBook Cupcake, which was a desktop-sized piece of hardware which enabled, as they put it, to allow anyone to manufacture anything. So this was something that I realized would enable me to make the second step. So first step was taking the ideas and producing digital files. Second was manufacturing of that. So I asked my parents, and very fortunately, a couple of months later, I somehow managed to convince them to purchase a $900 printer. How I did that, I'm still unsure, but I'm particularly grateful. So then, over a period of the next few weeks, I assembled that. And me and my brother, we assembled it, calibrated, tested, realized the limitations of the technology, which, with it being a first generation of technology, wasn't without its design flaws. But this was a particularly powerful stage, as I realized that it was now possible to prototype to a simplistic degree. And as the years have gone on, I've used different printing technologies, slightly more prosumer, more consumer, a whole range. And as time is going on, I'm realizing that the democratization of technology is allowing many of these technologies to advance far quicker than they were 30, 40 years ago, when there was a whole array of intellectual property protecting that. And now that the patents have expired, there's a whole load of innovation in that space. So another aspect is that on the electrical side of things, so with the mechanical design, that was addressed through 3D printing. However, for electrical design, there has not been the same democratization on the giving the manufacturing appliances to the consumer. Because with printing, 50 years ago or 30 years ago, they were $200 million machines, and now they're $200 machines. 40 years ago with printed circuit board manufacturing, they were $1 million machines. Now they're $1 million machines. Not much has changed. So they're still inherently very expensive. However, what has happened in this space is that there's a whole array of companies allowing people like me to access and manufacture through to those companies. So what has changed is 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you had to order a $2,000 board, which was about so large, and this would take, oh, the microphone, yep, closer. So it would then take about a month for you to receive this board, and that's $2,000 and a month down the line, which meant that it was very accessible for a whole load of companies, but not for, say, an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old. Maybe some, but not for the masses. What has happened is that there has been an array of companies such as Oshpark. So Oshpark is an American printing service which don't manufacture the boards themselves. They're like the Airbnb or Uber of circuit boards. So they provide the service to pass you through to the manufacturing companies. That's the main innovation that's happened in that space. So now I'm able to design a small board and upload that to the service and pay proportional to the area. So instead of $2,000, I'm paying $100 or $200, if that. And then they optimize the design flow and work with the manufacturers to make sure they receive the boards back quickly and to make sure that I receive the boards back quickly. So now, instead of the 2-month waiting period or the 1-month waiting period, I typically get boards within 6-7 days, which that's quicker than I can buy some off-the-shelf components, which is just absurd. So that's allowed me to progress from functional, they were functional, breadboard designs to more professional boards, which has allowed for more concise designs as well as much more repeatable and professional designs. So then the final aspect, which ties both the democratization of technology and the spread of knowledge, as I have mentioned a couple of times, is the community support. So over the years, I've been able to use these online platforms to benefit me. So back when I was learning Blender, there are 2-3 Blender forums specifically for learning that one hardware piece. So these are particularly friendly people who you can ask for advice or questions on the software so that you can learn at a more individual level and so that you can have a much greater understanding. So what the academic course at Cambridge provides was this very general course which made you learn everything, and then you had a tutor system so that you would be able to learn in a group of 2-3 with one tutor. And that's really great. And this is a similar thing for the internet. So you are able to put forward your situation and you receive feedback from people about your situation rather than a general article saying, yeah, this is broken, this is generally how you fix it. Of course, that's also available. So then, as time has gone on, so when I was 8 through 14 or so, it was primarily just using these resources for asking questions. And clearly, it's a two-way street. So clearly, there are kids like me asking just for support. But then there are people providing that support who range from other hobbyists to experienced engineers. And as time has gone on, I've been able to go from the other side of things. So I've been able to get to the point where I now have the knowledge in some areas to provide support to a degree that another kid would be able to understand. So one project that highlights all of these factors is a project that I've been working on for the last year. So as Mike said, there was a Hackaday Prize, which I'll talk about in a second, which I developed this hardware platform over a period of about 12 months. And it was essentially started because I wanted a new project or something to work on and to tie together the electrical and the mechanical design to a greater extent than I had done previously. So up until that point, I'd done lots of relatively small, so things taking from like a weekend to a month, but this was something that I wanted to take a longer period. So it was suggested to me to look at underwater gliders, and as I assume a couple of you, or majority are now, I was curious as to what on earth the underwater glider was to begin with. So it's an underwater robotics platform which looks pretty much like that, and allows for long-duration underwater missions which go for hundreds or thousands of miles. And although they're slower than conventional underwater robots because they don't have propellers, because they have this greater distance, they're able to track data across a much greater magnitude of area. So data scientists and climate scientists use them a lot for data analysis of the climate. However, because they're tailored towards these data scientists, one thing that struck me very quickly was the price. They're 50,000, 70,000 base, easily going up to $250,000. Now, clearly I realized that they're industrial equipment, they're designed to operate for years at a time, but I thought there was still no reason they needed to be more than 10. So I set out wanting to make something that was $2,000, which was able to do 90% of what they were able to. So this was a project that, as I said, spanned 12 months, and as I progressed through it, I was able to develop more iterations which went from something that wasn't functional, apart from it looked good, to a point where I was able to put it in the water and it was able to perform these missions. So, as I say, it was a particularly unusual and fun project, and this is something that hardware hacking has provided for me. It's given me the ability and flexibility to say, yes, that's an interesting thing, I want to do it. And then even if I don't have the skills to do it, like with this, when I started, I had very little understanding as to any underwater robotics. But I knew that I had the accessibility to the internet in order to learn the skills, and if I had a problem, I could either just straight Google it, or I could ask these communities on support. So when I started this project, I noticed the Hackaday Prize, which is a 10-month project, as Mike said, which is open to engineers, makers, hackers, basically people like me, or people who want to design stuff and put it out there. So the Hackaday Prize is run by Hackaday, and they set the one relatively straightforward challenge of do something beneficial for society. So I thought the glider would have been like a relatively good example of this, because it took the equipment that data scientists would use, which is 50, 70,000, affordable for some of them, but not all of them, and take it so that it's accessible for far more of them. So in the hope that data science would be a much more accessible technology. So over this period, I documented and uploaded design files to the Hackaday platform, which was both the requirements of the competition and enabled me to develop a small community of people who saw the design, started following it, and had a greater appreciation for my input into it. And then I had multiple people messaging me, asking about why I did a particular thing, or how this works, or why don't you do this? So I then started to have a small following of people who would provide input. And these were people who I wouldn't be able to interact with more normally. When I'm in the southeast of England, I'm in a relatively rural area without access to some of the naval engineers that were providing input. There's a small disparity there. So as time went on, more people followed this, and then some people started replicating the hardware. And then I was able to provide support to them so that they could produce hardware that I was happy functioned. So in November of last year, I came to LA to Hackaday Super Conference, where the Hackaday Prize winners were announced. And as I saw someone comment on the meetup, I was the winner, and as Mike said. And as that person commented, I did a speech at the time, which was relatively impromptu, and I feel it came across as that. However, it was just because I was completely ecstatic about winning. I'd spent 12 months working on this, from some weeks doing like 2-3 weeks because schoolwork was particularly intensive, up until 110 hours a week because I had a particular deadline. So this was a project that over this 10-month period, I'd really fallen in love with, even though I hadn't initially had a great appreciation for underwater robots. And I now realized that not only had I appreciated it, it was now starting to gain the appreciation of some of these big-name judges, some of which ranged up to like Chris Anderson, the editor-in-chief of Wired. So these were not insignificant people. So I'm going to close it by talking about my experiences of hacking and my admittedly rather brief experience of Cambridge. So it's 4 weeks. It's enough to say I went.
Put that on your resume.
Yeah, I went to Cambridge. So I realized that knowledge is now a commodity. And with the Cambridge degree, I was going there to be told a load of information. This was information that I realized that up until that point, I'd just been Googling, reading Wikipedia, watching Khan Academy, and finding the material myself. And typically, I would work best working at 10 o'clock in the night than being woken abruptly at 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't know, maybe it's a millennial thing. So I realized that the flexibility of hardware hacking and having the accessibility to this information is something that empowered me and enables a lot of other people my age, or just anyone, to do these things. So, and then over the last 20, 30 years, there has been this commoditization of pretty much everything. There's some things that hasn't. So on the software front, we've gone from design programs which cost $10,000 a seat for a year, which they still do, down to some software which is just completely free and anyone can access. So these 12-year-old kids who can't afford $10,000 a year, they can afford free. So this enables far more people to get involved in the process and to have to gain an awful lot of experience with this. So growing up, I realized that having the accessibility to this technologies allowed me to work through this and to gain the skills required for innovation. As I said earlier, I realized that now knowledge is something that's available to everyone. Value isn't created through the possession of the knowledge. It's now created through what you do with that. And as I've progressed as I said, I don't really know where I started. A decade? So as I've progressed through the last decade and I've just had more experience with this, I'm picking up the skills to be able to make those jumps from this is how something works, or this is the outputs of an online calculator which use these calculus principles, and this is how I can apply it in this printed circuit board. So it's the steps made. So when I design circuit boards, I'm using tools that are available to me. I want to know the output from those. So I realized the university course gives you is a very meticulous understanding of the entire process and all the calculations involved in that calculator. Some people really appreciate that. However, I realized that all I want is, yes, I want these to occur. I have this scenario. How do I optimize for that? And I'm able to have relatively easy access to that. So I realized I don't need a really meticulous understanding of the background. So that brings me on to my next point, that hardware hacking, and by doing things, by just going out and doing them, you only learn what's required. I say you learn everything that you want to in that area. So as I said with underwater robots, yes, I'd be able to do that after doing a 4-year degree or 4-year master's, because the courses are shorter in the UK. I'll be able to do that after a 4-year master's, or I could do it now, knowing nothing I needed to know, but knowing that I would be able to learn it as I went along. So what I realized is that when I started it, I didn't really understand most of the principles of underwater robots, or just how extreme water is. It's not a nice thing to deal with electronics. Many interesting experiences with batteries and water. So I realized that this was something that I didn't know how to solve when I started, but I would be able to progress. And when I approach those challenges, I knew I'd have the skills available to me to fix them. Or if not, I'd be able to reach out into the online communities that I had worked with over the years in order to ask for their opinion. And many of these people were certified engineers or people who had spent 15, 20 years in that field and knew, yes, this is a relatively easy mistake, but it's non-trivial. This is how you do it, or how you fix it rather than do the mistake. Because, of course, that's something I'd already got competent with. So I realized that over the years, hardware hacking is a rather fundamental way for me to pick stuff up and to develop hardware. As I said, hardware hacking is, for me, is hacking or breaking or making things the way I want it, not how other people thought I want it. And if I open something up and I don't know how it works, I figure out how it works, or I Google, or I just go through a day trying to figure out how it works, and then understand how I can tinker with it, how I can modify it, so it does work. So this is an appreciation that we now live in an age where this is available to everyone, and that over the last 5 years or so, this is something, this is now a feasible path for me to go down, to not go down the conventional route of Cambridge, and that hardware hacking is something I can do for the rest of my life and do that. So I will ask you to think about what you're doing and make sure that it is something you have a passion for, because you do have the accessibility to do whatever you want to do. So thank you.
Alex, amazing presentation. I really enjoyed hearing his story from childhood to young adulthood and his pursuit of passion. That's something I think a lot of us resonate with as entrepreneurs. And yes, we do live in an open source age right now where anything that you want to know is within your fingertips through the internet, through forums, and through other systems out there that apparently are readily available for engineers, budding engineers. So I think it's really cool that you followed your passion. You're able to sort of circumnavigate the conventional education system, which tends to focus a little bit more on history and theory. And then at the graduate level, then you finally get into that application. But he saved himself tons of time. And I'm a huge advocate for unconventional education and internships when available. So kudos, and that's just an amazing story. Another big round of applause. I love it. All right, so we're going to open up to Q&A now. If you have a question, raise your hand. Let's save stories and comments for offline. I'm sure Alex will hang out with us for a little bit, and he can share with you and your stories and whatnot. But questions now, comments later. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's definitely inspiring, and I think, like he was saying, something we can relate to as entrepreneurs. I guess one question I have, and there's a little bit of context to it, is around social responsibility. In an age where you see Facebook not just create community, but then get used to manipulate people politically, or Google, where I use it dozens of times a day, and you can, depending upon the question you pose, you get reflected back the information that you're seeking, and it may be polarizing or leading to conspiracy theories and things like that, right? And so I guess my question is, in the age of robotics and lots of other things that you can create but can also have an impact on society, besides hacking to learn about how to create something as an engineer, how are you using the opportunity of the internet to learn about social responsibility and how to apply that to the things you're creating? And have you thought about that at all?
Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
Yes.
Clearly, the social responsibility and making sure that what you're doing is responsible. Clearly, hacking provides a connotation which is not what I use it for. So hacking is, in the conventional sense, is the making and breaking of hardware. However, people do take that to mean various things associated with computers. So as you said, in the current age, with search terms and Google tracking and Facebook tracking, that's something that I'm particularly aware of. And there are some aspects of engineering where this is more prevalent than others. So there are some of the higher level of underwater gliders, which are primarily military applications. And I was aware of this, and I was aware that what I was looking at were the more scientific applications. And we're getting to the point where the scientific community is really quite open, and they're getting to the point where they want to support each other for a combined cause. So they're having the social responsibility of operating with each other. Whereas with some of these more commercial and much larger organizations, such as Facebook and Google, you have to understand that in the current age, they're having much greater effect, and that they're not necessarily working as closely with you as you want. So it's something that I'm aware of, and I typically stick to the community aspect of things, where I know that everyone that I'm dealing with are genuine. And as I have gone to events like this and at Hackaday, I've met those people, and yeah, they are who they are.
Next question, right here.
So I think one of the strengths of, first of all, I'm on your side. I got your back. But I think one of the strengths of the university or that path is interacting with a whole bunch of other people who are kind of similar to you in that space. And you're obviously an incredibly intelligent human being. And so I think I guess I'm asking, how do you keep from kind of having blinders on what you're particularly maybe interested in versus what you can really bring to the table and understanding what are the complex problems we're facing as a society? How do you see yourself in that space of going, well, I really like doing this, but I could really make an incredible impact? How do you kind of open your perspective to that? How do you hedge against kind of what could be ignorance of focusing on a key project and not being in that greater community of innovators?
So you're asking, how do I make sure that I am involved with other people and aware of what's happening in the space, rather than saying, this is what I want to do?
Sure.
It's things like this. So it's attending events like this and the Hackaday LA meetups, and gaining an appreciation of what's occurring in various different spaces, what people are interested in. So I'll be completely naive to say that I haven't noticed the trends of 3D printing and VR, AR, and blockchain, etc. So you have to gain an appreciation of what's currently interesting, and then just more generally, what requires innovation. So it may be a bit aspirational to say this, but there's no reason why it can't get to the point where I say, underwater gliders, they're going to be, or underwater robotics is going to be the next area. So there's both the appreciation and attending things like this to know what people are working on and where innovation is happening, and keeping my interests within that area.
Over here, Alex?
Yep.
Yeah, ostensibly, it looks like you've been very successful at a very young age, and I echo the same sentiment that Mike said earlier, that kudos to you for taking such a high risk at an early age, for dropping out of such an opportunity like Cambridge. I'm curious, in your journey, have you come across a large failure or large setback that's kind of been an aha moment that you could share with the community here in your journey to entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I'll say one example with the glider. So as I said earlier, there were points where I put in 110 hours. That's because I realized that I had to really fight for some opportunities. So it was rather trivial things like a lack of a pool available. When I started, I didn't realize that I was working on an underwater robotics platform. So then I knew that in order to progress, I would have to really fight for that and work very quickly to achieve that. And as I've been growing up, from a young age, I've been diagnosed with dyslexia. And I realized as time has gone on, as I started my application for Cambridge, I was worried this would be like a hindrance or hold me back. Because I thought that they wanted just the best at everything. And that I worried that I wouldn't be a sufficiently rounded character. But clearly, as I went through the application process and went through interviews, I gained confidence. So that's something that I feel held me back. So it's either individual events that I've had to fight for, or just feeling that dyslexia or some areas of development are slightly behind. So that just means I have to put in that extra 10, 20, 30% effort.
Good job.
Over here.
So what do you wish existed for guys like you who are, super motivated, exactly what you want to do, definitely maybe, it's definitely not a college or a university, but what is that next level step for a kid like your age coming out of high school, kind of has an idea about what they want to do, something technical that existed in your community or at least some geographic region where you all can come together? I feel like there is a step there missing. What did you wish that was there?
So I realized that a lot of the university courses, what they advertise is both their prestige and the accreditations they have. And there were some university courses that I turned down because of the lack of accreditation. And clearly going down the route of no university means I'm at the other end of the spectrum with having no official accreditation. So even though I'm operating at the level where I can do engineering projects, I'm not officially an engineer in the technical sense of the word. So for the hackers and makers like me, I kind of wish there's more programs for an appreciation to show the experience or the level of competence in an area. So just understanding that even if I don't go down the conventional route and that I can still do hardware to the same level, that people appreciate that. That's the main thing and something that I'm particularly aware of going against the tide like this.